The CEO of United Airlines last month, the CEO, he announced of all the hiring for all the new pilots that are coming up this year, all the hiring for the new pilots, the main focus is going to be diversity. What? Diversity? Not the best pilots you can find? The ones with the most hours of experience? Ones who've done it before? Nope, diversity. I don't know about you, but I'm sick and tired of flying all the time with these white pilots landing safely and on time. Boring.
Good morning. It's Friday, Police Craft Friday, January the 12th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have news shorts, patriotic shorts, motivational shorts, Bishop Barron, Ayn Rand, the 33 Strategies of War, and Police Craft. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I shouldn't change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. And now the news shorts.
In recent days, you seem to issue a warning that if in the courts, and even the U.S. Supreme Court, if they didn't treat you fairly, that maybe there would be bedlam in the country. Use that word, bedlam in the country. And in the last 2 days, at the same time, in the last two speeches, President Biden is focusing his campaign on the threat to democracy and political violence. Take a listen.
I'll say what Donald Trump won't. Political violence is never, ever acceptable in the United States political system. Never, never, never.
All right, so to Robert's question, this is clearly a focus of the Biden campaign. So can you say tonight that political violence is never acceptable?
Well, of course that's right. And of course, I'm the one that had very little of it. Take a look at wars. Again, I wasn't involved in wars. We beat the hell out of ISIS. We won 100%. We brought our troops back home. Look at the violence that we've had. Look at the violence we have recently.
Right, but when you say bedlam, what do you mean?
I think bedlam. I think you look at Joe Biden, it's bedlam. Yeah. You have a man who can't lead. You have a man who can't find his way off a stage after he makes a speech that lasts for about 2 minutes. No, I think bedlam is Joe Biden. I think that he's using this. This is just a political ploy. Trump is a dictator. He wants to be a dictator. You know, it's interesting. I did a show, Sean Hannity. Did you ever hear of him? He's a very nice man. And he said, essentially, you're not going to be a dictator, are you? Tell me. I think he was trying to give me a nicer question than maybe you guys would. He meant it very well. I said, I'm going to be a dictator for one day. We're going to do two things. The border, we're going to make it so tight you can't get in unless you come in legally. And the other is energy. We're going to drill, baby, drill. After that, I'm not going to be a dictator. After that, I'm not going to be a dictator. So you weren't saying that if the courts... the press picks it up. So I said, I'm going to be a dictator for one day. cut it. They go, I'm going to be a dictator. But they cut the rest of the sentence. No, I am not going to be a dictator. I'm going to manage like we did. We were so successful that the country was coming together. It was actually coming together and coming together well. It was a beautiful thing to see, and we're going to do that again.
When you have these woke revolutions, it requires all of us at some point to say, no, not going to do.
Big story involving the United States military. Escalation in the Middle East. Both the U.S. and British militaries have bombed more than a dozen military sites in Yemen.
As Jared Hill reports, the White House says this is in response to the Iranian-backed militia group's recent attacks on ships in the Red Sea, impacting shipping all across the world.
Overnight, British fighter jets took off from Cyprus, headed to conduct airstrikes against Iran-backed Houthi military sites in Yemen. The U.S. Air Force confirming more than 60 targets were hit across 16 sites, including command and control nodes, munitions depots, and launching systems. The strikes conducted with assistance from nearly a dozen other countries, including Canada and South Korea. The joint UK-US operation in response to more than 24 Houthi attacks on international shipping in the Red Sea since November. On Tuesday alone, the U.S. Navy said it had to shoot down 21 Houthi missiles and drones that were fired from Yemen. Those missiles supplied by Iran.
These attacks against vessels in the Red Sea pose a direct threat to lives, to freedom of navigation, and to global trade in one of the world's most critical waterways.
White House spokesman John Kirby Wednesday called the attacks reckless and escalatory. But the Houthis say their strikes on ships are in retaliation for Israeli strikes in Gaza. Thursday night outside the White House, protesters condemning the U.S. Britain-backed airstrikes in Yemen pushed for ceasefire in Gaza.
That's the only way to get the world off of the track of constant escalation.
And it isn't just the Houthis that have been targeting shipping commerce in the region. Thursday, a Greek oil tanker on its way to Turkey was seized by Iran in the Gulf of Oman. All of it fueling fears that the latest move could eventually pull the U.S. into direct conflict with Iran. Jared Hill, CBS News.
The U.S. Navy is warning American flagged ships to stay away from the Red Sea. This follows U.S.-led airstrikes against sites used by Houthis in Yemen. Protests have popped up, including outside the White House. The rebels have warned they will hit back harder, raising concerns about the conflict escalating even further.
Initial indications are that we had good effects, but of course we're prepared to take additional action should we need to.
Since mid-November, the Houthis have attacked more than 24 commercial and merchant vessels, including American ships, as a show of support for groups fighting Israel.
President Biden was back in the Commonwealth today.
He stopped at several businesses in the Allentown area. The White House said small businesses like these are at the heart of his plan to support communities that are often left behind. The White House said Allentown is a comeback story with an unemployment rate at a 20-year low. A new Quinnipiac poll of registered Pennsylvania voters shows the president leading former President Trump. If the election were held today, 49% would vote for President Biden, 46% for Trump. The difference is just above the margin of error. Quinnipiac says that this marks the first time in Pennsylvania that President Biden has a numerical advantage over Trump in the 2024 race. However, that hypothetical matchup is still, in their words, too close to call. Stay with CBS News Philadelphia for continuing coverage throughout the 2024 presidential election.
Now to former President Donald Trump, who took his campaign to the courtroom yesterday. He attended closing arguments in his civil fraud trial here in New York and spoke out in court after the judge initially warned him not to. The state attorney general is seeking $370 million in penalties. Trump insists the case is politically motivated. Robert Costa attended the hearing and joins us right now. Bob, good morning.
Good morning, Nate. Throughout this trial, former President Trump has clashed with the judge who will determine the scope of the penalty, and yesterday was no different, as Trump made it clear he sees his legal battles here and elsewhere as part of his presidential campaign. With his business empire at risk, former President Donald Trump was defiant as closing arguments were delivered in his New York civil fraud trial.
It's a disgrace, and they should pay me damages. That's the way it should be.
In the courtroom, he decided to speak up and lashed out at Judge Arthur Engoron and blasted New York Attorney General Letitia James, saying this has been a persecution, prompting the judge to interrupt, telling Trump's lawyer to control your client.
This is a sham, and it's a shame. Thank you.
The former president and his company have already been found liable for fraud, accused by James of falsely inflating the value of their properties to get better loans and insurance deals. Now she is seeking a $370 million penalty and to have him banned from doing business in the state.
This case has never been about politics. This case is about the facts and the law. And Mr. Donald Trump violated the law.
With voting in the presidential race about to start, the GOP frontrunner says he sees his legal challenges as a part of his campaign.
We have our best poll numbers. We have the best everything despite this, and maybe because of this.
Trump, who also faces federal criminal charges, says he intends to show up for those proceedings as well.
Are you planning to show up in court?
Yeah, well, I want to go to all of my trials.
When Trump told me he intends to show up for many more court dates, it illuminated how his legal calendar is likely going to overlap with key dates in the presidential race. Meanwhile, Judge Engoron says he will try to issue a final decision on the civil fraud case by the end of the month.
And that was the news shorts. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the military shorts.
China's nuclear missiles were filled with water instead of fuel. Where U.S. intelligence has found that corruption inside China's military-industrial complex, it's so extensive that China is likely unable to take on military action for years. With the U.S. alleging that the missile silos in western China, they were fitted with lids that don't open correctly, and saying Chinese defense officials were allegedly getting kickbacks on defense spending. And if you remember last year, Xi was purging top defense officials, and that's apparently why. Which, I mean, that's a stunning level of corruption if true. So follow to stay in the loop.
Maybe it's time for realignment between people who might find themselves in the wrong parties. I was a Democrat most of my life. I became a Republican only not too many years ago. And I had the pleasure of telling some of those people that are saying the Republican Party ought to broaden its base the other day that when I switched parties, I didn't do it because the two parties were alike. I did it because they were different.
What does it take to prove yourself within Ranger Battalion?
You show up, your life is going to be real bad because they don't care that you've been through RIP or whatever. They'll look down on the stuff of like, no, you know nothing, and now you start. Now it starts. So it's like, oh, well, he's been to RIP, so he must be good. Nope, they're going to see for themselves. If you want to know whether this guy really got my six, can I really count on this dude? Is this a quitter? What's his character like? What's his attitude like? Do I want to be around this guy? All elements of the person come together. It's not just how good of a shooter you are. Do you fit within this culture? Can I count on you? Are you tough? Everything is a test.
Asked their sons for some money. And the first son was a lawyer, and he said, no, I can't do it. I'm just fitting out a new law office and sending my son to an expensive camp. So they asked their second son, a doctor, but he said, no, I'm sorry, I can't. I just bought a new house, and my wife is putting in a new kitchen. Then they asked the third son, who was an engineer. And he replied, it just would be impossible for me to do it. I have just bought a big boat for the family, and I'm remodeling our summer home on the lake. And finally, the father pleaded, look, we've worked all our lives, not one day of vacation. We never had any money except what we saved for your education. In fact, do you realize that your mother and I were so busy working, trying to save money, that we never took the time out to get a marriage license? And father, said all the three sons in unison, do you realize what that makes us? He said, yes, and cheap ones, too.
What happens if a U.S. warship enters Russian waters? Let me explain. In 1986, the USS Yorktown cruiser and USS Karen destroyer ventured into Soviet territorial waters. The U.S. Navy was supposedly on an innocent passage to somewhere else. They were just traveling through the Black Sea. At first, the Soviets did not respond with any action. However, a few days later, the Defense Council made a strategic decision because of the incident. Soviet ships would now be allowed to intentionally bump foreign ships to make them exit from their waters. And 2 years after the first incident, history repeated itself. But this time, things were very different. The USS Yorktown and Karen entered Soviet waters once again, a move that wasn't essential for their mission. A Russian frigate ship issued warnings, telling them to leave the area. Moments later, the Soviet frigate steered into the USS Yorktown, while another smaller frigate hit the USS Karan. The American warships changed course, moving into neutral waters.
I'm 94 years old,
a Holocaust survivor. My name is Naomi Wallman. I was a little girl in the Shoah. The Germans started to bomb Belgium, and we were told to hide in the basement of a church with hundreds of other people. Everybody was praying St. Tehillim by heart, but I didn't know anything by heart. All I could remember to say was the bracha on bread. I said it over and over again, Hamotzi lechem min haaretz, and my whole family was saved. I never thought I would see another Shoah, but there is a major difference between then and now. Then we didn't have an army, so here is your secret weapon. When you feel danger, say that bracha, Hamotzi, and may Hashem take the lechem, lechima, out of our land. I love you all. God keep you and safe and return to your loving family.
This Ukrainian pilot took a selfie in the middle of a fight, and the reason is not what you think. Let me explain. On October 12th, 2022, luck finally ran out for this pilot after successfully downing 5 Russian drones within a 24-hour period. The moment happened when the last drone blew up, launching debris into his aircraft. Unfortunately, both his engines were destroyed, and the windshield shattered. Shards of glass started cutting his face. There was a lot of blood. Fire quickly took over the cockpit, forcing him to guide his flaming MiG-29 towards an open field. But just moments before impact, he ejected from the jet at 1,500 meters. As the pilot was parachuting towards the ground, he kept his composure. Realizing that he may never get an opportunity like this again, he took the chance. Grabbing his phone, he snapped a crazy selfie. The pilot sent the selfie over to his base and let everyone know that he was alive and well. Once shared, the photo spread like wildfire.
First World War British infantry ranks. The basic and most numerous soldier in the First World War was the private. Average age 26, average height of 5 feet 5. His superior was a lance corporal with 4 men. Above him a corporal commanding a section of 8. Next is the sergeant with a platoon of 30. His boss was the company sergeant major, overlooking up to 200 non-commissioned men, and directly above him, the regimental sergeant major, the senior non-commissioned officer of a battalion of up to 1,000 men. Then officers, second lieutenants and lieutenants commanded platoons. Captains, the most deadly rank to hold in the First World War, commanded companies, as did some majors. The lieutenant colonel commanded a battalion, and his direct superior, a brigadier general, led a brigade of 3,000 to 4,000. Above him was a major general commanding a division of around 12,000. The lieutenant general was responsible for a corps, and the full general an army. The highest British rank in the Great War was the field marshal, commanding literally millions of men.
He flew 25 combat missions across Europe as a radio man and gunner on a B-24 Liberator with the 453 Bombardment Group based at RAF Old Buckingham. He was decorated with the Air Medal in addition to numerous other honors, including 6 battle stars. He was nicknamed Kid Reliable by the others because of his steady nerves and composure under fire. He was born Walter John Matthau, but the world would come to know him as Walter Matthau, the versatile and iconic actor of film, stage, and TV. Were it not for a brief conversation with one of his superiors in the 453, he might have gone unnoticed to the world. After one particular debriefing, Staff Sergeant Matthau finally summoned the courage to ask him a personal question. It was about a career in acting, something Group Operations Officer Jimmy Stewart knew a little about. Follow your passion, the legend told Kid Reliable, and it'll all work out. It did work out for Walter Matthau.
Pakistan is now asking the U.S. for help fighting the Pakistani Taliban. Right, because since 2021, the Pakistani Taliban has been terror attacking Pakistan, killing hundreds while using Afghanistan as a safe haven. And the Pakistani Taliban, also known as the TTB, they were founded with the promise to overthrow the so-called infidel state of Pakistan. Now, the Afghan Taliban very implausibly deny that they allowed the TTP to be based in Afghanistan. And you had the U.S. expressing sympathy and understanding to Pakistan when asked for help, but ultimately they said they wouldn't be helping at this moment. Also, if you're getting a sense of deja vu, it's because this whole scenario is the inverse of what happened at America's 20-year war in Afghanistan. Though this, of course, is a problem of Pakistan's own making. Pakistan aided, abetted, funded, and gave sanctuary to the Afghan Taliban throughout the war in an effort to undermine the Afghan government, the United States, and NATO, and of course India, with them believing that the democratic Afghan government would just become a puppet of India once America left. And they did all this while receiving billions of dollars in aid from the U.S. And so when the U.S. finally left Afghanistan, Pakistan's bet paid off and the Afghan Taliban took over. But then to their dismay, they released thousands of TTP fighters who the U.S. and Afghan government had imprisoned for attacking Pakistan.
And that was the Patriotic Shorts. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the motivational shorts.
The first attempts forward I took in the gym, I went to this swim exercise class. Jesus, it was me and this like really fat guy, probably not in any worse shape than me, and like 7 old women over 70, and they could outswim me. Like it was pretty damn humiliating. And so I did a semester of that and got myself in somewhat better shape. And then I started to go to the gym to work out, to lift weights. And that was also rough because, you know, I'd be underneath the bloody bench press trying to lift 75 pounds off the rests. And, you know, some muscle-headed bastard would come over and tell me how to do it. And it's like, yeah, thank you. But, you know, it's embarrassing. And lots of times people won't do things like go to the gym because they're so embarrassed about how they look or what sort of shape they're in. And it's a pain to start at the bottom. But you start at the bottom where you're weak. And if you want to rectify what's weak, you have to accept the fact that you're at the bottom and that the first steps are going to be painful.
Here is how Elon Musk can avoid paying taxes and buy any house he wants. Elon was smart enough to never get paid a salary whilst running and owning Tesla. Instead, he opted to get paid in stock options. These stock options that he originally got were around $6 a share. This meant that when they rose substantially towards $1,000 a share, he was now worth millions on paper. But those millions were not in his bank account. And rather than sell some stocks, pay taxes, and have an income, he did something different. So instead, Elon would approach a bank and show them his stock options worth hundreds of millions of dollars and ask them for a loan. These loans with around 4 to 5% interest would be given to Elon based on his worth. And providing his company grew by, let's say, 6% a year, he would be making a profit from taking that loan and can continue to live his rich life the way he chooses to live it.
How to destroy your enemy without fighting. Number 1, stay calm. Don't let your enemy see you upset. The main thing a bully wants is to get a reaction from their target. Don't give them the satisfaction. Stay calm and cool. Lets the bully know that they have no power over you. Number 2, look them in the eyes. This sneaky psychological tactic can be very disarming. Next time your enemy tries to push you around, do your best to make and hold eye contact. It makes you look more confident, which might be enough to throw them off their stride. Plus, they'll be forced to really see you and maybe think twice about being so unkind. Looking them in the eyes and laughing or smiling can be especially effective. If they're trying to get you upset, that's not the reaction they'll be expecting. Number 3, team up with some trusted allies. Dealing with an enemy alone can be really difficult. As Sun Tzu famously pointed out, you're much more likely to defeat an opponent if you outnumber them. Talk to some other people you trust about what's going on, whether they're family members, friends, or people in your professional support network. If your enemy sees that you have a bunch of other people in your corner, they're more likely to back down and leave you alone. Number 4, build yourself up instead of bringing them down. Disappoint them by being the bigger person. When you lash out at your enemies, it shows that they've gotten to you, which means they've won. On the other hand, a true enemy will hate to see you happy and successful, which means that living your best life is the best way to defeat them. A few ways you can do this include focusing on self-care. Do things that you find enjoyable, relaxing, and fulfilling. Spending more time with friends and other people who lift you up instead of bringing you down. Making a list of your strengths and positive qualities. Repeating an empowering mantra to yourself. If you found this video helpful, hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. Thank you for watching.
We are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more in imagination than in reality. It isn't the things themselves that disturb people, but the judgments that they form about them. If you want something good, get it from yourself. You can bind up my leg, but not even Zeus has the power to break my freedom of choice. How does it help? To make troubles heavier by bemoaning them. Don't seek for everything to happen as you wish it would, but rather wish that everything happens, as it actually will. Then your life will flow well. Don't explain your philosophy, embody it. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Wherever there is a human being, there is an opportunity for a kindness.
7 things you should always keep private. 1. Don't speak ill of yourself. Avoid negative self-talk, as it undermines self-esteem and hinders personal growth. 2. Don't boast about self-improvement. Personal improvement should be a personal journey, not something to boast about. Actions speak louder than words. 3. Don't be a glutton. Moderation in all aspects of life, especially in eating and drinking, is crucial for success and harmony. 4. Don't be a big mouth. Listen more than you speak. 5. Don't be too focused on the future. Focus on the present. Control your reactions and reduce unnecessary stress. 6. Don't be ungrateful. Express gratitude for the blessings in your life to foster positive relationships and create an appreciative environment. 7. Avoid complaining. Complaining is counterproductive and brings negativity.
If you evaluate someone for suicide risk, here's how you do it. You might say to someone who's depressed, do you ever think about suicide? And they say, well, now and then, the idea enters my mind. You think, well, that's not indicative of risk. But if they say, well, at home, my father keeps a .45 on the top shelf of the cabinet on the north wall, and the bullets are in the drawer on the left-hand side, and I've thought about going down there, and one day I, actually had that gun in my hand. You think, this person is on the edge because they've concretized the temptation to the point where they've allied it with a very specific plan, a genuine discipline. Like, you can think of discipline as, you shouldn't do that. But that isn't what discipline is. Discipline is the integration into a higher form of freedom. That's a much better way of thinking about it. It's like, yeah, you're a lot freer if when you're 50, you basically have the physique of someone who's 30. If the price you pay for that is that you have to give up gluttony, which is exactly what I want to eat, whatever I want to eat, whenever I want to eat it, that's not freedom. That means you're completely subordinate to your hunger, unless you think you're your hunger.
Democritus. Nothing exists except atoms and empty space. Everything else is opinion. Antisthenes. The most useful piece of learning for the uses of life is to unlearn what is untrue. Empedocles. The nature of God is a circle of which the center is everywhere and the circumference is nowhere. Diogenes of Sinope. Of what use is a philosopher who doesn't hurt anybody's feelings? Plato. The measure of a man is what he does with power. Zeno of Elea. The reason why we have 2 ears and only 1 mouth is that we may listen the more and talk the less. Heraclitus. No man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river, and he's not the same man. Pythagoras. Educate the children, and it won't be necessary to punish the men. Gorgias. If something exists, it is incomprehensible, and if it is comprehensible, it does not exist. Socrates. I cannot teach anybody anything. I can only make them think. Socrates. The only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing. Plato. Wise men speak because they have something to say. Fools because they have to say something. Empedocles. We must strive for excellence, even if it is unattainable. It is in the striving that we find purpose. Thales. The most difficult thing in life is to know yourself. Aristotle. It is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. Epicurus. Do not spoil what you have by desiring what you have not. Remember that what you now have was once among the things you only hoped for. Diogenes, the foundation of every state is the education of its youth. Pythagoras, there is geometry in the humming of the strings. There is music in the spacing of the spheres. Anaxagoras, everything has a natural explanation. The moon is not a god, but a great rock, and the sun a hot rock. Heraclitus, change is the only constant in life.
And those were the motivational shorts. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now the daily laws for January the 12th.
January 12th. The obstacle is the way. Some people do not become aware of inclinations or future career paths in their childhood, but instead are made painfully aware of their limitations. They are not good at what others seem to find easy or manageable. The idea of a calling in life is alien to them. In some cases, they internalize the judgments and criticisms of others and come to see themselves as essentially deficient. If they are not careful, this can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Nobody faced this fate more powerfully than Temple Grandin. In 1950, at the age of 3, Temple Grandin was diagnosed with autism. A doctor had suggested she be institutionalized for the rest of her life. Through the help of speech therapists, she was able to avoid such a fate and attend regular school. She slowly developed an intense interest in animals and in autism itself. This led to a career in the sciences. With her exceptional reasoning powers, she has been able to throw light on the phenomenon of autism and explain it in a way no one else has been able to. Somehow, she had managed to overcome all of the seemingly insurmountable obstructions in her path and find her way to the life's task that suited her to perfection. When you confront your limitations, you are moved to respond in some way that is creative. And as it was for Temple Grandin, it may be in a way that no one else has done or even thought of before. Daily law. Confront one of your limitations, one of the obstructions in your path, today. Break beyond it, climb over it, think your way around it. Don't run from it. It was created for you. Mastery, Chapter 1. Discover your calling, the life's task.
And that was the Daily Law for January the 12th from the Daily Laws by Robert Greene. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now Bishop Robert Barron.
I can't tell you how many times I heard this little adage. It's not about what you do, it's who you are. It's not doing that matters so much, it's being that matters. I mean, I'll admit there's something to that distinction. Sure, I get it. At the same time, I've always felt that distinction is simplistic, as though we can simply divorce our being from our action. When, in point of fact, I think our being is deeply influenced by our acting and by our doing. Work has a lot to do with the kind of people that we become. In our moral choices, we make ourselves the people that we are becoming. And in a similar way, in the work that we do, we become the people that we are meant to be.
And that was Bishop Robert Barron. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the Ayn Rand thought of the day. Quote, "The fundamental principle of capitalism is the separation of state and economics. That is, the liberation of men's economic activities, of production and trade, from any form of intervention, coercion, compulsion, regulation, or control by the government. This is the essence of capitalism, which is implicit in its theory and in operation of a free market." unquote. And that was the Ayn Rand thought of the day. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now we continue on with the 33 strategies of war.
The further we go, the harder it becomes to pull back and rationally reassess the situation. In such circumstances, the costs tend not just to mount, they spiral out of control. If things go badly, we get exhausted, which leads us to make mistakes, which lead to new, unforeseen problems, which in turn lead to new costs. Any victories we might have along the way are meaningless. Understand, the more you want the prize, the more you must compensate by examining what getting it will take. Look beyond the obvious costs and think about the intangible ones. The goodwill you may squander by waging war. The fury of the loser if you win. The time that winning may take. Your debt to your allies. You can always wait for a better time. You can always try something more in line with your resources. Remember, history is littered with the corpses of people who ignored the costs. Save yourself unnecessary battles and live to fight another day. From The Art of War by Sun Tzu. When the weapons have grown dull and spirits depressed, when our strength has been expended and resources consumed, then others will take advantage of our exhaustion to arise. Then, even if you have wise generals, you cannot make things turn out well in the end. Strengths and weaknesses. When Elizabeth I, 1533 to 1603, ascended the throne of England in 1558, she inherited a second-rate power. The country had been racked by civil war, and its finances were in a mess. Elizabeth dreamed of creating a long period of peace in which she could slowly rebuild England's foundations, and particularly its economy. A government with money was a government with options. England, a small island with limited resources, could not hope to compete in war with France and Spain, the great powers of Europe. Instead, it would gain strength through trade and economic stability. Year by year, for 20 years, Elizabeth made progress. Then, in the late 1570s, her situation suddenly seemed dire. An imminent war with Spain threatened to cancel all the gains of the previous 2 decades. The Spanish king, Philip II, was a devout Catholic who considered it his personal mission to reverse the spread of Protestantism. The Low Countries, now Holland and Belgium, were properties of Spain at the time, but a growing Protestant rebellion was threatening its rule, and Philip went to war with the rebels, determined to crush them. Meanwhile, his most cherished dream was to restore Catholicism to England. His short-term strategy was a plot to have Elizabeth assassinated and then to place her half-sister, the Catholic Mary, Queen of Scots, on the British throne. In case this plan failed, his long-term strategy was to build an immense armada of ships and invade England. Philip did not keep his intentions well hidden, and Elizabeth's ministers saw war as inevitable. They advised her to send an army to the Low Countries, forcing Philip to put his resources there instead of into an attack on England. But Elizabeth balked at that idea. She would send small forces there to help the Protestant rebels avert a military disaster, but she would not commit to anything more. Elizabeth dreaded war. Maintaining an army was a huge expense, and all sorts of other hidden costs were sure to emerge, threatening the stability she had built up. If war with Spain really was inevitable, Elizabeth wanted to fight on her own terms. She wanted a war that would ruin Spain financially and leave England safe. Defying her ministers, Elizabeth did what she could to keep the peace with Spain, refusing to provoke Philip. That bought her time to put aside funds for building up the British Navy. Meanwhile, she worked in secret to damage the Spanish economy, which she saw as its only weak spot. Spain's enormous, expanding empire in the New World made it powerful, But that empire was far away. To maintain it and profit from it, Philip was entirely dependent on shipping, a vast fleet that he paid for with enormous loans from Italian bankers. His credit with these banks depended on the safe passage of his ships bringing gold from the New World. The power of Spain rested on a weak foundation. And so Queen Elizabeth unleashed her greatest captain, Sir Francis Drake, on the Spanish treasure ships. He was to appear to be operating on his own, a pirate out for his own profit. No one was to know of the connection between him and the Queen. With each ship that he captured, the interest rate on Philip's loans crept upward, until eventually the Italian bankers were raising the rate more because of the threat of Drake than because of any specific loss. Philip had hoped to launch his armada against England by 1582. Short of money, he had to delay. Elizabeth had bought herself more time. Meanwhile, much to the chagrin of Philip's finance ministers, the king refused to scale back the size of the invading armada. Building it might take longer, but he would just borrow more money. Seeing his fight with England as a religious crusade, he would not be deterred by mere matters of finance. While working to ruin Philip's credit, Elizabeth put an important part of her meager resources into building up England's spy network. In fact, she made it the most sophisticated intelligence agency in Europe. With agents throughout Spain, she was kept informed of Philip's every move. She knew exactly how large the armada was to be and when it was to be launched. That allowed her to postpone calling up her army and reserves until the very last moment, saving the government money. Finally, in the summer of 1588, the Spanish armada was ready. It comprised 128 ships, including 20 large galleons, and a vast number of sailors and soldiers. Equal in size to England's entire navy, it had cost a fortune. The armada set sail from Lisbon in the second week of July. But Elizabeth's spies had fully informed her of Spain's plans, and she was able to send a fleet of smaller, more mobile English ships to harass the armada on its way up the French coast, sinking its supply ships and generally creating chaos. As the commander of the English fleet, Lord Howard of Effingham reported, "Their force is wonderful great and strong, and yet we pluck their feathers little by little." Finally, the armada came to anchor in the port of Calais, where it was to link up with the Spanish armies stationed in the Low Countries. Determined to prevent it from picking up these reinforcements, the English gathered 8 large ships, loaded them with flammable substances, and set them on course for the Spanish fleet, which was anchored in tight formation. As the British ships approached the harbor under full sail, their crews set them on fire and evacuated. The result was havoc, with dozens of Spanish ships in flames. Others scrambled for safe water, often colliding with one another. In their haste to put to sea, all order broke down. The loss of ships and supplies at Calais devastated Spanish discipline and morale, and the invasion was called off. To avoid further attacks on the return to Spain, the remaining ships headed not south, but north, planning to sail home around Scotland and Ireland. The English did not even bother with pursuit. They knew that the rough weather in those waters would do the damage for them. By the time the shattered armada returned to Spain, 44 of its ships had been lost, and most of the rest were too damaged to be seaworthy. Almost 2/3 of its sailors and soldiers had perished at sea. Meanwhile, England had lost not a single ship, and barely 100 men had died in action. It was a great triumph, but Elizabeth wasted no time on gloating. To save money, she immediately decommissioned the Navy. She also refused to listen to advisors who urged her to follow up her victory by attacking the Spanish in the Low Countries. Her goals were limited: to exhaust Philip's resources and finances, forcing him to abandon his dreams of Catholic dominance and instituting a delicate balance of power in Europe. And this, indeed, was ultimately her greatest triumph, for Spain never recovered financially from the disaster of the Armada and soon gave up its designs on England altogether.
And that was the second part of Chapter 8, Pick Your Battles Carefully, from the 33 Strategies of War by Robert Greene. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the next chapter of Policecraft.
If they want to gear down a bit, they might use only an arm sleeve, which they hide under civilian clothes to simulate how suspects are dressed on the street. Cole has a friend on the L.A. County Sheriff's Department who would don a thin leather gauntlet covered with layers of newspaper to simulate human skin. The problem with this approach is when the dog clamps down on the newspaper, it hurts like a mother. Officers in the Netherlands favor pigskin from the butcher shop to wrap around the trainer's arm because it's the closest to human flesh. But using the sleeve alone isn't sufficient because that teaches dogs to go only for arms and leaves them confused about what to latch on to if, for instance, a suspect's arm is folded under his body and inaccessible. During training, the dogs go hard. Cole once suffered a concussion when his canine hit him full bore and flipped him over, padded bite suit and all. He described this almost fondly, like he might recount an incident when he got a little banged up playing a fun game with one of his children. Cole has had suspects, especially those hopped up on drugs, actively fight his dog, punch his dog, try to strangle his dog. Cole would jump in and tackle the guy while the dog was still biting him, risking, with all those flailing arms and legs, a bite himself. The dog's natural bite is the front canines, which is what they use on their prey in the wild. The rear teeth are just for chewing. Handlers teach the dogs to go in deep on the bite because it isn't about damage, it's about pain compliance and holding the bad guy in one place. You don't want the dog treating the suspect's limbs like corn on the cob. In order to teach a proper hold, trainers put the dog in a harness tethered to a 20-foot bungee cord. If the dog lets go of the bite, it is propelled backward on the bungee, which isn't fun at all. But most dog training is heavily concentrated on both play and rewards, and it is non-stop, which is why police dogs don't make good house pets. The owners don't have the commensurate energy to keep up. Canines are typically German Shepherds or Belgian Malinois. Rottweilers, Cole told me, get fatigued too fast. Shepherds aren't as common as they once were because they have a problem with their hips wearing out, hence the more recent move to the Malinois. A police dog costs about 10 grand. Most hail from Germany or the Netherlands. Cole's last dog, Ziggy, was a Malinois, and he had to learn some Dutch to give Ziggy commands. Cole described Ziggy as a Jack Russell Terrier in a shepherd's body, and described Malinois in general as strong alpha dogs with an abundance of energy and phenomenal recovery time. They can go 11 or 12 years on the force as working canines. SFPD's police dogs are all dual purpose. They first and foremost serve as patrol dogs, which means they look for suspects. Their secondary function is either narcotics or explosives detection. You don't want dogs trained for both narcotics and bombs in order to avoid, among other things, the confusion of whether the dog is indicating he just found a pound of cocaine or a pound of TNT. This distinction would be important in the field. Dogs' alerts come in different forms. Some sit and stare at the source, be it narcotics or explosives. Others scratch, although you'd want to avoid that indicator for bombs for all the obvious reasons. The hit is a generic one and not drug-specific, so a dog won't have one tell for cocaine and another for heroin. Same deal with explosives. The indicator for Semtex is the same as C4. One type of canine SFPD doesn't currently have on the roster is a tracking dog. They have trouble in an open urban environment due to the population density. If a suspect flees into the housing projects where he lives, his scent is going to be spread around from his previous time there, and even if the dog can narrow down the location where he fled, it can be an uphill battle to get a search warrant solely off a canine track to a house. But if a good tracker has something to get a scent off, like abandoned clothing, and is operating in a more rural environment, The handler will put them on a 40-foot lead and make a go of it. Some tracking dogs are better on old tracks, and some need fresh ones. Because of how the dog is trained, if they find someone at the end of the track, they're going to bite, so if the dog gets onto the wrong trail, the homeless guy who happens to be sleeping in the bushes along the way could be in for an unpleasant surprise. But while canines don't always get it right, Cole pointed out, they still make far fewer mistakes than people do. They do well in finite, enclosed spaces. They are going to find that late-night burglar tucked away in an upper corner of the 3-story warehouse. They are going to hone in on him like his pockets are stuffed with pork chops. On the SFPD, only the canine handler or the officer in charge of the unit may say whether a dog will be deployed. It's their call because they know the dog's capabilities. This policy prevents some green lieutenant from sending a dog into a house where, for instance, there's a gunman who has already shot at cops. All this will accomplish is to sacrifice a valuable asset, the dog, for no gain. But sometimes it goes the other way, where a supervisor doesn't think to use a dog when it would be the very thing to do. Cole told me of a time when a suicidal boyfriend reportedly barricaded himself in an upscale house after physically assaulting his girlfriend. A member of the police command staff drove up, demanded SWAT respond, and tasked them with pumping the house full of tear gas. 21 volleys of tear gas, to be exact. When SWAT was done, they had broken every window and every door. One gas canister sent a chandelier crashing down on a dining room table. There was so much tear gas shot into that home that it left a powder residue thick enough to show footprints. The whole house became a hazmat scene. All the carpeting had to be replaced. And after all that, turns out the guy wasn't even in there. I was just going to open the door with a key and send the dog in, Cole said, but he was overruled by the higher-ups. The projected cost of Cole's plan? $0. The homeowner's claim submitted to the city? A cool $250,000. Our bad, taxpayers. Police dogs are practically one of the fellas. They often wear ballistic vests. They have their own badge or star number. They go home with their handler because they're pack dogs, and their handler is part of their pack. If they are killed in the line of duty, they receive a stately funeral. Mess with a police dog, and it's a felony. And don't expect understanding treatment from the dog's handler, because the bond between cop and canine is family strong. In fact, if you're the suspect in an incident that hurt or killed a police dog, you should probably just catch the first bus out of town. Handling things that might blow up also falls under the umbrella of special operations. As a patrol cop, you will occasionally be called to someone's house because they were cleaning out the attic and found some of Granddad's stuff from the war or a few items from weird cousin Kenny's duffel bag. The homeowner isn't sure what it is or if it's dangerous, so you have to be able to do some on-the-fly explosives recognition before you just start picking stuff up and holding it close to your face. Blasting caps look like long silver whistles with a wire sticking out. C4 resembles pliable ivory soap. Anything remotely explosives related that's moist or exuding crystals can be deadly. And explosives can age well, which means World War II ordnance could still be good to go. Most suspicious package calls are baseless. A transient left a bag of his stuff in a doorway, and someone passes by and calls it in as a potential device. The temptation as first responder is to walk up and open it yourself and get this over with, because the last time anything exploded in your district was when Tolliver from Midnights ate too many chimichangas and lit up the station bathroom all shift. But if you like your arms attached to your torso, you don't want to take too many chances. Bombs don't always look like bombs, especially not to your untrained eye. So you gotta show bombs some respect. Because it only takes that one time when you casually stroll up to the abandoned package and open it without any protective equipment, and the resulting explosion turns you into pink mist. The names that should be on your mind are Ted Kaczynski, the Tsarnaev brothers, and Eric Rudolph. You need to call the experts, the bomb techs, who use X-rays to examine suspicious packages, have liquid nitrogen to freeze destructive devices, and still employ Geiger counters to detect radiation. But at times, even the experts step wrongly and pay the price. In 2008, a suspicious device was left outside a bank in Woodburn, Oregon. Senior Trooper William Highcomb, a Navy vet, 11-year cop, and bomb tech, brought it inside the bank because he thought it was a hoax. When he examined it more closely, it detonated, killing Highcomb and Captain Tom Tennant, and seriously wounding Chief Scott Russell and a bank employee whose name has not been released. Highcomb was a bomb tech in the Navy who had real-world experience dealing with actual explosives. He was in the major leagues of bomb cops. It is not speaking ill of the dead to say you can learn from the Woodburn tragedy. No one gets it right all the time. Not the first responders, and not the experts. But when it comes to explosives, there is no margin for error. To get a better handle on explosives, I sat down with an SFPD sergeant who spent a number of years on the department's bomb squad. He preferred to remain anonymous, citing a desire to reduce his net presence. The first question I asked him was if he had ever encountered a bomb with a digital countdown timer like you see in the movies. He had not. He described the devices he had encountered in his career as fairly crude. He was too polite to inform me my lead-off question was fairly stupid. It also probably helped that I was buying him lunch. An exploding bomb is shrapnel plus concussive force. The shrapnel shreds your flesh, but the blast overpressure liquefies your organs. You may see a police bomb tech in a bulky bomb suit walking slowly toward a potential explosive and think, "Hey, that guy will be fine. Look at that ginormous suit. Nothing is going to get through that. Guy looks like one of the Transformers." But while a police bomb suit protects against shrapnel, it offers only a limited defense against the concussive effects of a high-end explosive. If the bomb goes off, your organs are still on their own. The sergeant thought it was hard for the general public to understand how fast explosives move. Bombs are different from bullets and different from fires, he explained. A bullet from an M16 travels at roughly 2,800 feet per second. The slowest of the high-end explosives travels at 17,000 feet per second. He invoked the scene from Lethal Weapon 2, where Murtaugh is sitting on an explosive-rigged toilet, and Riggs pulls him into a nearby bathtub and pulls a bomb blanket over them. Both men survived the blast and lived to crack wise some more. But, the sergeant pointed out, a bomb circuit closes at the speed of light, so Murtaugh would be instantly incinerated as soon as his butt cheeks left the toilet. The debunking of this scene made me somewhat forlorn, as this is an awesome cinematic escape that I wanted to be possible. The sergeant observed that it's common for patrol officers to peer around the corner at a suspicious device from, say, a block away. But given the velocity of explosives, if it does detonate, you won't have time to duck your head back behind cover. Your head will be gone, and you won't even have time to miss it, because the whole thing will be over before you see the device go off. I nodded knowingly, while thinking back to the multiple times I've been that guy peering around the corner at the weird package. Patrol's tendency to underestimate devices is why, on the SFPD, the bomb tech has complete control over the scene. He's the expert and cannot be vetoed. He can tell a deputy chief what to do, and if the deputy chief doesn't like it and insists on doing things his way, the tech will shrug, pack up his gear, and leave. One of the biggest misconceptions of bomb work is that it's really exciting. It's more of a methodical and technical slog. Once you get past the skin, the sergeant said, they're all exactly the same. He talked about the paranoia bomb work brings with it. Once you become a bomb tech, everything looks like a bomb. He eyed the ketchup container on our table. I know how to make that into a bomb, he said matter-of-factly. Made me glad he's one of the good guys. If you have a hostage situation or a person threatening suicide, You get on the horn for a special operations negotiator. They have the requisite training and the snazzy pins on their uniforms to prove it. You don't send just anyone up there to talk to the troubled soul, certainly not the patrol lifer on his third marriage and struggling with both the bottle and diabetes. He might be thinking of jumping himself. You want to use lateral thinking when dealing with jumpers. In October of 2015, SFPD negotiators used the suspect's beloved cat to help coax a distraught car thief down from an upper-story window, ending a 3-hour standoff on Harrison Street. My old Southern Station co-workers Jordan Oriole and Ronnie McGoldrick once responded to a rooftop on 6th Street where a despondent young woman was threatening to make the leap. Both natural-born schmoozers, the two cops chatted with her for a time, found out her favorite song, Bobby Brown's My Prerogative, and then played it on a cell phone. I am told one or both officers may have even accompanied the music with a few dance moves, the running man chief among them. She laughed and stepped away from the brink, and the officers were able to transport her to a mental health center. You do what works. I once tried convincing a naked, suicidal, and grease-covered man to get off the top of a crane with the promise of a pack of cigarettes and 2 donuts. He was unimpressed with my offerings, claiming he didn't smoke, but my negotiator co-worker smooth-talked him down by playing a song from the Cranberries. And he still got the donuts. Well, one of them anyway. A cop ate the other one. You probably saw that coming. Negotiators avoid lying to the person they're negotiating with and never make promises they can't keep. If you lose the person's trust, the negotiation is effectively over. One seasoned cop I spoke with said he had gone his last 30 negotiations without lying, save for one. Curious, I asked him about the one. He told me he was in an extended conversation with a barricaded suspect who was on the brink of suicide. The suspect said he would emerge only if the negotiator promised to attend a Trump rally with him. In a move born of desperation, the negotiator agreed, and the suspect promptly walked right out. The negotiator ended up taking a pass on the rally, perhaps concluding that nothing was worth that.
And that was not the special or a second chapter, another chapter. It was the second half of Chapter 6, called Special Operations, from the book Policecraft by Adam Plantinga. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States. Today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you to be honest, smart, and beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.